After glancing at my phone, I observed that there were 20 missed calls and they were all from my mother-in-law, Elizabeth. Once again, I sighed, pondering the situation. My phone vibrated once more and I reluctantly answered. Elizabeth's voice came through, dripping with anger. "Excuse me, isn't the allowance for this month $3,000 overdue?" she demanded. I tried to maintain my composure, replying, "Elizabeth, I already told you, the allowance for this month hasn't been deposited yet." Elizabeth, however, seemed completely uninterested in my circumstances and was only focused on her own desires. Frustration welled up inside me, and I had finally had enough of her behavior. Even in such a dire situation, she showed no reflection on her words or actions. I knew I had no choice but to resort to my last option. Gathering my strength, I blurted out to my phone, "Your son has passed away, Elizabeth. I can no longer send the allowance. My name is Scarlett Leona, and I'm 35 years old. I'm a busy working woman at a major financial firm." Reflecting on how I got here, I realized that Thomas and I had been married for about 4 years. We met through our shared hobbies, and his warm smile quickly captured my heart. After a year of dating, we decided to get engaged, both believing that we wouldn't find anyone better suited for us. Our relationship had been relatively smooth, and our decision to marry went off without a hitch. However, the real problem had arisen with Elizabeth, my mother-in-law. Thomas's father had passed away a few years ago, leaving Elizabeth as Thomas's only family. The trouble began when I first visited Elizabeth's home to introduce myself before our wedding. As I greeted her, Elizabeth's displeased expression was evident. "So, you're Thomas's fiance?" she said with a hint of disdain. "Ah, yes, my name is Scarlett." Elizabeth didn't mince words, commenting, "You're a rather plain girl. I wonder what Thomas sees in you." I couldn't discern whether she was joking or genuinely meant what she said. Hearing such words from the mother of the man I loved left me utterly shocked. Thomas, noticing my state, frowned at his mother. "Hey, Mom, what's with the sudden harsh words? How can you say such things to the person I chose?" "No, Thomas, I'm just trying to choose a suitable woman for you," Elizabeth replied. "Choose? I'm the one who chose her. You have no right to meddle," Thomas retorted. "Don't say it in such a cold way. I'm just telling the truth because I care about you. If you were really thinking of me, you'd simply support us. Why can't you understand such a simple thing?" The atmosphere grew tense as an argument unfolded between mother and son right before my eyes. Given that this was my first meeting with Elizabeth, I wasn't in a position to intervene. Although the atmosphere remained awkward, we ultimately managed to express our intent to marry. As we were leaving, Elizabeth called out to Thomas, sounding somewhat disgruntled. "Thomas, can I have a word? You're going to keep that promise after you get married, right?" Thomas seemed puzzled. "What promise?" "You know about the allowance," Elizabeth replied. That, yes, I'll be sure to take care of that. Can we not discuss it here, please?" Elizabeth's request hung in the air, and the tension between my husband and his mother remained palpable. The car ride home was filled with an uncomfortable silence, and I couldn't help but ask Thomas about the allowance issue that had been bothering me. "Hey, Thomas, about the conversation you had with your mom as we were leaving." Thomas sighed, realizing he should have told me earlier. "Yeah, I should have told you about it, Scarlett. I heard something about an allowance after my dad passed away. I've been sending my mom money every month, $2,000 to be exact." $2,000? I couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Thomas let out a deep sigh and began to explain slowly. "Actually, my mom has a debt she incurred a long time ago when she lost a significant amount of money at a casino. She's still paying it off, and these days, her health isn't great, so she spends a lot of time at home. But she still needs money to get by." "But $2,000? Isn't that quite a lot?" I questioned. If I try to lower the amount, she keeps calling me over and over again. And, you know, a mother is still a mother. I worry about her living alone. I could see that Thomas was genuinely devoted to his mother, and it made sense. Since his father passed away, Elizabeth had been the only family he had left. Regardless of her character, she was still his beloved mother. Back then, I only saw my husband as a kind person. 4 months after our wedding, during my lunch break one day, I received a phone call on my smartphone. It was Elizabeth calling. "Hello, Scarlett. Long time no see. Can we chat for a bit?" she said cheerfully. "Sure, Elizabeth. What can I do for you?" I replied. "Well, I was hoping you could start sending me money." "Excuse me?" I was taken aback and struggled to find words to respond. However, Elizabeth seemed excited to continue the conversation. "You mentioned before that you're working for a financial company, right? That means you have a good salary, doesn't it?" "Well, not exactly," I tried to explain. "It's not about avoiding giving you money," Elizabeth interrupted. "Then what is it?" "But Elizabeth, you're already receiving financial support from Thomas, aren't you?" I asked. Defiantly, Elizabeth replied, "So what?" Scarlett sternly stated what she felt. "Elizabeth, receiving $2,000 in monthly support is a big deal, and yet you're asking for more?" Really? You think so?" Elizabeth responded, seemingly unappreciative of the support. "If you were to send me an additional $1,000, I could avoid burdening Thomas," Elizabeth proposed. "What do you mean by that?" I inquired. "Well, I have Thomas as a guarantor for my debts. If I fail to make payments, the debt collectors will go after him. Do you understand?" "But aren't you using part of Thomas's $2,000 to pay back the debt you owe?" "I'm still short," Elizabeth admitted. "I haven't told Thomas, but I have a significant amount of debt." From Elizabeth's tone, it was apparent that this was a fact even her husband was unaware of. Having children in the future would increase our expenses. Additionally, taking over Elizabeth's debt was not an easy task. But if Elizabeth's payments fell behind and the debt landed on Thomas, the interest would likely accumulate significantly by that time. I reluctantly agreed to Elizabeth's proposal, thinking it might be better for her to pay off her debt now. "All right, I'll start sending you money." "Really? That's great, Scarlett. I knew you would say that. So with Thomas's contribution, it will be $3,000 in total. But this means you can pay off your debt, right?" "Yes, of course. I should be able to pay it all off in about a year." "You promise, right?" Elizabeth asked earnestly. "Make sure you pay off all your debts, got it?" "So I'll be expecting it from this month onwards." Elizabeth abruptly ended the call. The emotional burden, combined with my work-related exhaustion, only added to my stress. $1,000 a month would be a significant financial strain, but it was a preventive measure to avoid future problems for us. After all, if Elizabeth couldn't make a living, it would undoubtedly upset Thomas. That night, I promptly reported the situation to my husband. He told me I didn't have to do this, but I had already given my word to Elizabeth, and it was a decision made for our future well-being. Thomas expressed his gratitude and understanding, though he wore a sorry expression throughout. Time flew by, and 4 years had passed since then. The financial aid we initially thought would end in a year was still ongoing, and we were still transferring $3,000 every month to Elizabeth. What's more, about 4 months ago, Thomas fell ill and couldn't go to work. He was on sick leave, receiving disability benefits, but it was a mere pittance compared to his previous salary. Last month, I managed to transfer $3,000 to Elizabeth from my savings, but if this situation continued, it would be extremely challenging. To make matters worse, unbelievably, Elizabeth had not once come to visit her sick son, despite us informing her of his hospitalization. She only contacted me to ask, "You're still sending the money, right?" I was so angry that I decided to confront Thomas about the issue. "Thomas, don't you think it's wrong that Elizabeth is only concerned about money even though you're in such a state? We need to seriously consider what to do going forward." "Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing," Thomas replied, his anger evident. "I don't want to put more strain on you, Scarlett. This month, too, she's been bombarding me with calls and messages, asking if we've sent the money yet. Are you serious? How can she only think about money when her own son is sick?" Thomas's face wore a slightly worn expression, and then, as if he had an idea, he exclaimed, "That's it?" "What is it, Thomas?" "Well, this is our last resort. I've come up with something good." "For your mom?" "Yeah, for my mom." Thomas's suggestion was a plan I could never have imagined. Although it could be considered inappropriate, It seemed to be the only way to make Elizabeth understand. A few weeks later, Thomas was discharged from the hospital. Elizabeth hadn't replied to any of our messages, so we didn't inform her about Thomas's discharge. In the last 2 weeks, Elizabeth had been relentlessly demanding the money, even though there was no point in sending it to a mother who didn't even worry about her son. While Thomas and I were enjoying a cup of tea, a message came in on my phone. Upon checking, I found 13 missed calls from Elizabeth once again. As I expected, my phone vibrated again, and it was another call from Elizabeth. "Hello?" I answered, turning on the speaker microphone so that Thomas could hear. Elizabeth started shouting right away. "Listen, where's the $3,000 for this month?" "Excuse me," I replied calmly. "That's right. The money for this month hasn't been transferred yet. Elizabeth, do you realize Thomas is now—" "I don't care if he's in the hospital or whatever. It's none of my business," Elizabeth interrupted angrily. "You're working at a good place, right? You must have plenty of savings. Hurry up and transfer it here," Elizabeth continued shouting angrily, eventually saying something unbelievable. "Listen, since you married Thomas, if he can't pay, you have to pay me. Understand? If you refuse, I'll make you the guarantor, got it?" Elizabeth's words sent a surge of frustration through me. She was openly displaying her desires without considering our situation at all. I had reached my breaking point with her. She didn't even try to reflect on her own actions. Now I had no choice but to resort to the last resort. Firmly, I declared into my smartphone, "Thomas has passed away. I can't send you any more money." At those words, Elizabeth blurted out, baffled, "What?" Yes, this was the last resort that my husband had suggested, lying to Elizabeth about Thomas's death and observing her reaction. If she showed any sign of sadness, if she reflected on her behavior and apologized, we would continue to support her financially. But if she didn't reflect, if she demanded money, we would sever ties completely. Deep down, I thought that even a money-focused woman like Elizabeth would deeply reflect on her actions if she were told that her own son had died. But the very next moment, Elizabeth burst into loud laughter. "What's so funny?" I asked, bewildered. "Well, isn't it obvious?" Elizabeth replied. "If Thomas is dead, that means his inheritance will be distributed to me too." "Excuse me, I've been looking into it since I heard that Thomas was sick. Listen here, 2/3 of Thomas's assets are yours, but 1/3 is mine." I was at a loss for words. I never thought that when she first heard that her son was sick, she wouldn't look into treatment but into how the inheritance would be divided. My anger surpassed words. I was simply dumbfounded. My husband seemed to feel the same way, and as our eyes met, he slowly nodded. This was the signal to continue with the plan. Once again, I said to Elizabeth in a strong tone, "Elizabeth, did you hear what I said? Thomas is dead." Elizabeth replied casually, "I heard. What about it? Aren't you sad your own son passed away?" I tried to provoke some sign of remorse, asking, "You just make sure to send me some." But Elizabeth responded coldly, "I won't let you get away with not doing it." With that, she abruptly ended the call, leaving us with a dial tone echoing. I glanced at my husband and saw that he was shaking, his face red with anger. "Thomas, are you okay?" I asked. My husband looked into my eyes and said, "I'm cutting ties with her. She'll likely come here eventually demanding money. Let's wait until then, okay?" "But are you really okay with this? Cutting off ties just like that?" "Yeah, I have no regrets. After that call, she's no mother." My husband's eyes were filled with hatred, and I felt the same way. A person who only thinks about money over her own son's life is not family to me. A few days later, as we expected, Elizabeth came to our house. For the time being, I decided to hide my husband in the next room and deal with Elizabeth myself. As Elizabeth approached me, her face twisted in anger. "Hey, give me Thomas's inheritance right now," she demanded, her tone demonic. "Again with that?" I retorted. "Anything else to say? He's already dead, isn't he? It's pointless to say anything now. Yet you never even visited him. What are you saying? Are you really his mother? You're so annoying. Give me the inheritance right away. I don't mind getting a lawyer." Speaking more would be a waste of time. Just as I thought that, my husband emerged from the next room. Seeing him, Elizabeth let out a startled gasp as if she had seen a ghost. "Thomas, why weren't you dead?" "Long time no see, Mom," Elizabeth exclaimed. "Sorry, but the news about my death was a lie," Thomas replied calmly. "A lie? How could you be so disrespectful?" "I wanted to confirm your true nature, Mom. I was curious about how you'd handle the allowance if your own son died. But you turned out to be a gold digger just as I suspected. I've got that perfectly." "What? How dare you call your mother a gold digger?" Elizabeth protested. "Silence, I'm cutting ties with a toxic parent like you," Thomas declared firmly. Elizabeth's mouth hung open in shock at her son's angry outburst. She couldn't come to terms with the fact that her own son was severing ties with her. "What? What does this mean, Thomas?" she stammered. "It means exactly what I said. I can't consider someone like you as my mother, no way." "But what about the allowance? Do you really think I would—" "You're on your own with the debts, we're moving." "Wait, please, if you do that, what about my living expenses?" Elizabeth pleaded tearfully, reaching out to her son. Thomas forcefully shook off her hand, looked at her coldly, and said, "I don't care about your living expenses. You've been living off us without even a single apology. I really understand your despicable nature now. Don't you dare show up in front of us again." "No, wait, Thomas. Are you going to abandon your mother?" Elizabeth cried out. Ignoring her words, Thomas grabbed Elizabeth's arm and dragged her to the front door. He threw her shoes and bag outside and chased her out of the house. Elizabeth made a fuss outside for a while but eventually disappeared, perhaps unable to withstand the scrutiny of the neighbors. She tried contacting us multiple times, but we ignored all of her attempts. We set Elizabeth's number to be automatically rejected, and we finished moving. Regarding the matter of co-signing for the debts, it became invalid since Elizabeth had made Thomas the co-signer without his consent, and therefore, he was not responsible. Without the allowance from us, Elizabeth seemed to be leading a miserable life. It was only natural as she had been using the allowance for her gambling habits instead of paying off her debts. She still had a mountain of debts and was chased by debt collectors every day. She couldn't gamble anymore and seemed to be working from dawn to dusk. It was unlikely that she would be able to pay off her debts completely, and she would have to keep working until she was unable to move. This was entirely her own doing. As for us, we were spending fulfilling days in our new home. My husband's condition had stabilized, and he had returned to work. After some time, a new life was growing in my belly, and we were going to have an additional member in our family next year. From now on, we wanted to spend happy days as a family of 3.